Ooh, this is spicy. So we got our banned and restricted list for Grand Archive today. What's going on, everybody? This is Mark from Slow Games. Pretty big news, right? So the new banned and restricted list from Grand Archive is announced today, and I think while on the surface the whole thing is not that big, it's really just one little change about the level up mechanic within Grand Archive. I think on a larger level, I'm more interested, and I think a lot of other people are too, into the philosophy of the team, how they think through bans, how they design it, and what their concerns are. What do they actually care about, right? And that's really important because I think that does shape the future of not just future ban lists, but also future game design, future cards. These things are very important to us as players. So let's get to it, right? So in case you missed it, the change is that level up no longer wakes up the champion, right? So this is pretty much like I think is okay. Well, it's a thing that will happen basically once or twice per game where it would actually affect something, and really it only really helps the decks that can do something with kind of like waking up or untapping your champion. So this really hurts like attacker types, like for example Lorraine, who may want to swing with a sword again, or it may hurt like I don't know Merlin, who can maybe basically I don't know like potentially double banish again in future sets. She currently can't do that because she doesn't have it level 3 yet. But otherwise, I think it's pretty minimal, and it's only like a one-time thing anyways, right? So again, the idea here is most of this is just to try to slow down the game. I think a lot of the design of the future of FTC, right, Fractured Crown, and Future is to attempt to slow down the game a little bit, as the game right now is a little bit fast, and it pretty much can be a little bit oppressive or for newer players, right, who may just want to try their deck. And it does make water, for example, as a meta really, really tough because other, like fire and wind both have options for speeding up their game, and water really doesn't have that and doesn't even have ways to properly slow down the game. Now, with this change, it does give water one pretty important weapon, which is Freezing Hail. But again, it only really works on that like second level up, level 2 Lorraine to level 3. That really makes a huge difference if you use Freezing Hail. Otherwise, I mean, Lorraine's still going to do Lorraine things, so there's that. One of the biggest things that this will affect is if you are a Lorraine player, the combo where you can kind of go to level 2, right, as your normal materialization, giving you that 2 extra attack, and of course on kill, draw a card. You can't really use that +2 attack again. So one of the things that a lot of players were doing is they would level 2, make an attack, and then immediately go to Dungeon Guide level 3, which basically gave them a free Spirit Blessing because it woke up the champion, and they're able to now play a Spirit Blade Ascension at 0 cost, right? Instead of using, not Ascension, Infusion at 0 cost instead of the 2 cost normally, and drastically speed up their gameplay and game plan where they can kind of make that kill maybe even one turn earlier. So why was this ban or restriction made? Well, the change is really made because it gives too much tempo to the attacking champions and the ones that can potentially use rest mechanics, and also for future design space. If they want to make a champion that can do something like tap to do something or attacking, knowing that they can wake up will severely make sure that their attack ability or tap ability are weaker. So something that a lot of the developers are thinking through is saying, hey, like if we take this rule out, then that may mean that we can actually make champions that have better tap abilities because we have a more assurance that without using one extra card or whatever, they can't just wake up their champion easily. It's not something that you can just do normally, right? And of course, this does kind of basically nerf, if you will, Dungeon Guide and Beseech the Wind a little bit because their effects of leveling up the champion is not as strong as the effect of it without this rule change. So there's that. Of course, Freezing Hail does have extra value, but again, it's only just for that same level. If for example, if you play Freezing Hail normally, it would still do the same thing. It would keep the champion rested for the next turn, etc., etc. Okay, things to watch out for though, because this announcement was made. this is, in my opinion, and this is not like said by them or anything like that, it is in my opinion that this is a soft ban for Dungeon Guide, which again, being that it's a normal element, it can be included in every single deck, is potentially a problematic card for the future. Something that they're going to consider to probably at least restrict, if not outright ban the card. This also means that Besiege the Wind could be a thing that they're targeting. Now, Besiege has so many other uses too, other than just leveling up, so I'm not so worried about Besiege. Also, the fact that it's a wind element, not just a normal element, makes me less concerned about that card. Dungeon Guide, though, I do feel like, and I think a lot of the other players also feel the same way, that this card is probably likely going to see a ban in the future. Okay, so let's talk about other ban and restricted announcements. So there were other things announced also in this release. That's not just the Dungeon Guide or, not Dungeon Guide, the Level Up, right? So they first kind of released a bunch of bans and stuff for future cards. I think it's more or less just rule implications around like what's legal in a draft or sealed format versus a standard format. And the other card that was banned is simply because some players will have access or early access to a FTC card that's not yet released. So it's banned until probably FTC releases. Not a big deal. The fun stuff is the watch list section. So there, Grand Archive or Weaves of the Shore is implementing a watch list system. It's very similar to what other card games have, which is like they kind of say these are cards we're considering a ban, but not quite at the point where we would issue a ban. So they have 3 categories for the watch list. Category 3 details cards that are banned or restricted because they're too powerful and they have too much implications on how the meta works or how the game works, and overall it restricts either game design space or meta diversity, so of the top decks, right? Category 2 is what they called like the danger zone. Basically, these are cards that are very, very powerful and very problematic and likely will see a ban if and unless something else changes. So inside that category, there are 2 cards. One is Avarice. For the sole purpose is that card momentum. So Avarice is too effective with Spirit Blade Ascension. So if you played any Lorraine player, you probably know what this combo is. They basically play Spirit Blade Ascension on their own Avarice to pull the Avarice back out of the deck again and draw 2 cards. So then Ascension is essentially Ascension, draw 2, Ascension, draw 2. And then with further recursion like Crux Sight, you're able to redo that combo many, many, many times again and again and again in the same turn. And if you do this at a certain other phase, like for example, after Materialization, before Recollection, you may basically be able to do that almost 2 times within the same turn and really like get way ahead or just win the game in that turn. So that is problematic. The reason why this is banned, though, is because of something called card momentum. So this is a new term that Grand Archive is inventing. The idea here is that if a card, something has card momentum, if it can draw too many cards to the point where you are giving the player who has priority too much to decide, right? So imagine I have a hand of, let's say, 5 cards. I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to be doing my next turn. I draw 1 card for the turn. Maybe I draw 2 if I crack a card, say Grand Crusader Ring. You have a little bit more extra information that you might have to decide around, right? And maybe what your opponent does. But essentially, it's pretty stable. The problem with cards like this that have lots of card momentum is that, first of all, the extra cards will give you options to gain more cards. This happens a lot in Crux. And second of all, because it can gain more cards and give you more cards in hand, it will also give you way more decision, right? So you may have planned your turn to be very simple, like, hey, I'm just going to swing once and then end my turn. It has now become potentially do this with this combo, in this order, so that I can potentially win the game next turn, right? And so that makes the turn when you do a lot of this, like Ascension, Avarice type of thing, like really, really slow. And of course, it slows down the game. It makes it an unfun experience for both players. It's just something that can be a problematic thing for the future. Reckless Conversion was the other card that's on the list of category 2. So again, very, very problematic, something that they're thinking about banning. The reason for Reckless Conversion is that it's basically a win con for Rye. If at the point where you have a lot of cards in memory, you're basically ready to go, you play this card to essentially get another turn because you get all the cards in memory back into your hand by discarding basically 2 cards. It's really not big of a deal. This is supposed to be a win con. Like you play this card, you're going to win the game. The problem is that this card is designed in a way because it's grabbing more cards back into your hand. It allows you to make more decisions. The chance that you win is not 100%. It's more like, let's say, I don't know, just 99% was what they threw out on the posting. And the idea is that if you're a player, and this is a professional play, if there's even 1% chance that you could win, you don't give up the game. So it makes that turn when Rai goes Reckless Conversion a lot longer and maybe unnecessarily longer. The card really should have been just said something, I don't know, like as an option, deal 30 damage, right? And then effectively it's a much simpler decision. Either you can defend it or you cannot, and then you move forward. So again, it has to do with card momentum, more decision points, and just makes longer turns. And having that is not a fun experience for the game, for the player that has to play against that card. Okay, so that's pretty much those two in what we call category 2. Again, Reckless Conversion, even on the surface, is just a very powerful card by itself. Category 1 is what they call unhealthy, or kind of like problematic for future design and balance. And so the idea here is that, you basically want to have cards that are kind of like on the watch list, and maybe they're going to be problematic in the future, but, not sure what direction to go yet. Maybe something changes the meta and they kind of fall out of favor, and now it doesn't matter too much. But basically, some things to consider, right, are number 1, Creative Shock, number 2, Tactful Sergeant. Both of these cards are what we call auto-include. So in Magic's Gathering, if I say the Soul Ring problem, a lot of people understand what this means. Essentially, Soul Ring is a card in Magic where it's really powerful, and its effect is really good, especially for Commander, where basically every Commander will have to run a Soul Ring guaranteed. There is almost no Commander deck that wouldn't run it, because it's going to be useful for everything. And that's why, for example, if you're building a fire deck, essentially, even if you're not playing Mage, you're going to be using Creative Shock. It is very, very good for that deck. Similarly, Tactful Sergeant as a creature-heavy deck, or creature attack-heavy deck, you're going to play Tactful Sergeant a champion attack-heavy deck, you're going to play Tactful Sergeant because it gives you card advantage in the sense that you play a creature that's hard to get rid of, but also draws a card into your memory. So there's that. Varuk basically is a domain. Now, domains in Grand Archive are powerful effects, but have pretty major drawbacks. And the whole idea here is that you're basically creating a situation where you could do something, but it prevents you from kind of keeping that forever, like an enchantment in Magic, because if you're basically limited from materializing, which is a very powerful thing to do in Grand Archive. The problem with Varuk as a card is that essentially, if you're playing that card, you're ending the game that turn. There are very few cases where you would want to play Varuk and then not end that same turn. Because again, the whole idea here is that you're playing the card to prevent someone else from preventing damage. And so you take, things like Water Barrier, Deflecting Edge, Spell Shield, Arcane out of the picture with that one card. So it limits basically the drawback side of the card, and it becomes play this card, they can't prevent your damage, kill them this turn, which could be bad for design. Again, maybe this card in digital format could be fixed by increasing the cost, so you can't really combo off that easily. But again, it's one of those things where we do have a paper card game, and it is impossible to go change that further, and your only options are to ban the card and potentially in the future design a new, better version of it that's a little bit more balanced. Lastly, Freezing Hail. So Freezing Hail, with the change with level up, this card has become a lot better, but it's not so high up on the tier list that any water deck will run it. I think we'll see what happens. I do think that if you're running water deck, you should at least include a couple of these, because it is fairly good to be able to lock down an attacking champion. Again, it's something you probably would sideboard if you're playing against like Rai. You don't need to have this because Rai is likely not going to be rested, right? So there's that. So generally my thought right here on the ban list, right? So as I stated in the beginning of the video, my kind of thinking is not that, I don't really care for this ban list what specific cards are going to be banned. I care more about the direction of the game and where the creators are kind of taking it and how they think through problems. Again, like I said, problems will arise for a card game, but it's more important how you deal with and not what the problems are. I think my main concern with this specific ban list is that I think the current meta has a rock paper scissors format, in the sense that Wind Lorraine is usually beats Fire Lorraine, which usually beats Fire Rye or Arcane Rye, and then which beats Wind Lorraine. So there's like kind of like rock paper scissors among the 3 top tier decks. The issue right now with this ban list is that you're going to be able to knock 2 of the decks out of that meta, or not out of the meta, but knock it down a little bit within that, kind of tier list, and it makes it clear winner for Arcane Rye. And this is one of the concerns I have, is because it looks like this change basically doesn't affect if you're playing Arcane Rye, but it does affect almost all the Lorraines equally. So there's something to be said about that. But again, I'm happy that they're making a ban restricted list. I'm also happy that they're putting the considerations into not just the current meta, but what the future looks like. So this is all, again, signs that this is a mature team that's really thinking about a problem for the future. I'm also happy that they are announcing ban lists the way they are, because again, they're coming out of the gate telling you exactly the things that they're thinking about and the reasons why they think this way. And again, future cards that they're going to ban potentially, or very likely. So that's helpful. That's going to do it for me for today. I'm Mark. This is Solar Games. Look, Grand Archive is pretty cool. It's still looking great, and this announcement has made me more interested in the game and interested in the future than before. So there's that. Anyways, stay classy.